Hi, this is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. This is not a health how-to, but rather a conversation with some amazing people I've had the pleasure of being with on my journey of life. Think of it more like Tuesdays with Maury, a fireside chat, or chicken soup for the soul. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. Today on Conversations with a Chiropractor, I'm joined by Paul Meese. Paul spent most of his work life as a human resources executive. He also trained dogs for special needs people. He was also a musician and still is a musician, and he is a philanthropist, and most recently, he is an author. So thank you for joining me today, Paul.
Of course, my pleasure.
Your writing a book, unfortunately, came after the tragic passing of your wife, Ruth.
Correct.
It's entitled 19 Days, One Man's Journey Through Grief. I read the book. It was wonderful. I feel like it was so honest and so just absolutely raw and real. I can give our listeners, or you can give our listeners, a little bit of backstory if you want. Your wife, Ruth, had a stroke in the year 2000.
Correct.
So then she was having blood work drawn like every 3 to 6 months. And unfortunately, in 2018, there were some bad numbers.
Correct. So there's a point where she was on meds as a result of the stroke. They never identified when the stroke happened exactly or what caused it or the details of it. They had a team of 17 doctors analyzing it, and they never got to the details. And this is when we lived out in California, so I know that it was high-quality physicians that were there. But anyway, she was used to being slightly above where the normal range is for whatever she was taking, and they continued to tweak the meds. And so every 3 to 6 months, as you said, they would go in and adjust something, add something, take it away. She wasn't not talking about one pill, we're talking about multiple pills. The test was negative. She had to go in, and they had to do a bone marrow biopsy. I thought that giving birth was painful, and this was the most painful thing I've ever seen somebody go through. There's no anesthesia, there's no numbness, they just do it. And as I said in the book, it's like taking a cleat tightener and shoving that into your femur, and at the same time trying to get a piece of bone chip out of that. The first time they failed, so the doctor had to go in the second time and do it over again. And Ruth has always been very, very active in the holiday season, and she loved Christmas and she loved entertaining. The band I was playing in at the time, we were having our party at the house, and she sort of had to take a step back and not be as active as she usually is with that. And so it's like, okay, she had felt a little quiet off. Then we got to Christmas, and we make a Finnish pancake called panakaku, and so that's part of our tradition. And she usually takes care of breakfast, and first we open our stockings, and we do breakfast, and we open the presents. And my son and daughter-in-law were living with us at the time, and she started making it, and then she said, "Paul, I need you to help." She goes, "I need you to finish. I can't do this." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, sit here and watch me to make sure I don't mess up." So I finished breakfast, and we ate, and then we opened presents, and everything seemed to be normal. And then on the 28th, as I said in the book, my dog Jaxie was a 14-year-old black lab, and had woken me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I'd home turn the lights on. I walked to the bathroom, and I stepped in a pile of poop, and she left for me. And I thought, well, I cleaned that up, and then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take a shower, and did so. And then Ruth said, "You need to get me to the critical care." She said, "I haven't slept for 3 days."
Wow.
And so with Kaiser, they've got online, they've got to talk to a physician. And so I brought that up, and this is at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're asking me questions, and I asked Ruth, and she'd answer them, and then I type it back. And then the doctor said, "Somebody will call you within a minute." And then a minute later, the phone rang, put her on speaker. They asked Ruth directly some additional questions. And the doctor says, "You need to get her to the emergency room right now." And I said, "The one across the street or your facility?" And he said, "My facility," which is a half hour away.
Like a bigger hospital.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So it'd be like going to Marquette instead of going to Munising,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So I went there, and we very much expected that it would be tweak the med time. And so that's what we're used to, is people making those adjustments. So I brought the local newspaper, which was about as thick as the Marquette paper, so not heavy reading, thinking that we'll be out of there by the time I get done with the crossword puzzle, a couple hours, we're done. And everybody we saw said, "How much oxygen are you on?" And she goes, "I'm not." And they're like, "Really?" It was the same response from every nurse, every doctor that came in. And she was in and out of there, and they're running tests, take her for a test, bring her back. And then finally by 2:00, they checked her in the hospital, and she never left. And she died 19 days later.
Oh my gosh, Paul. I mean, what a like a shock. Not just a tragedy, but a shock for you.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it's a point where you're a couple of days into it, and then you go, okay, you're going to get a night's sleep, and then you'll be better in the morning. And you keep waiting for that to happen, and it never does. At one point, we thought we were talking about a bone marrow transplant at the beginning. And then as we got into it, I talked to one of my colleagues. I said, "We're treating leukemia." And she goes, "Yes, we are." And that's a whole different thing. And it's at that point where I realized, I'm sitting there going, I'm watching my wife die in front of me, and there's not anything I can do about it. And so on day 2, they asked for power of attorney. And as a side note, the power of attorney is my hot button, and not enough people have that in place. And I'm a believer that you should have that just like you have a birth certificate or a driver's license or anything else. That is critical information. You never know when you're going to go into the hospital. You never know when you're going to get in an accident. And if you don't have a power of attorney, you don't have somebody there making decisions for you and being your advocate, that allows the doctors to do whatever they want to.
Even though you're married, without a power of attorney, you have no legal right to make decisions on Ruth's behalf.
That's correct.
Wow.
And so she would have died 2 to 3 days earlier had the physicians done what they wanted to do. And so that was me advocating and me doing what I felt was the right thing. So we did get her on chemo. It was a new chemo treatment, but the leukemia was so fast that the treatment couldn't get ahead of it.
Yeah.
That's all.
Wow.
And if you ever sat through a chemo treatment, it's scary as hell, because the people who come in and administering it, they are wearing hazmat suits.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sitting there watching them come in the room, and I'm like, should I be here? Should I be wearing something else? And it's like, no, you're fine, but we're going to put this down the toilet, so don't go to the bathroom for 6 hours.
You think about the toxic chemicals, like, yes, they are to kill the cancer cells. But unfortunately, we know they're ravaging the human body because
Yes.
they're not differentiating between a cancer cell and a healthy tissue cell. They're just like
Attack.
killing it.
Yeah. So, the doctor was very optimistic when we started, and he says, you probably won't even lose your hair. And Ruth's eyes got big, like it wasn't even a thought to her, but it was all so fast that there wasn't a chance for any of that to happen. So,
Wow. So she started getting chemo, and yet her health continued to decline.
every day.
Wow.
And it's like we had to put her onto a respirator. And at that point, 85% of people who go on respirators don't come off. And so it was the final Hail Mary, but I want her on the respirator for the end because I wanted that last chemo treatment to try and turn it around. That was my true Hail Mary pass, was at the end. The doctors would not have done that. They would have let her go before that.
And I think that there's probably comfort in those of us who are able to make some of those decisions and feel like you did everything you could. Like everything was done to try to save Ruth's life.
Yes.
Everything in the medical world's power, in your power, you did everything you could have done.
To the point I said, do you want to change teams? Do you want me to get you in Mayo's? And she said, no. She says, I'm happy with what we're doing. And we did. We sat down every night and we talked about what happened during the day and who I might have fired and who, the treatments that were going on and how she felt. The only thing she got anxious about was when I left at night, but I'm like, I can't stay 24/7 every single day. There were times where I had to go and get a break.
Oh, absolutely. Because even the most healthy individual without sleep in that very stressful situation, probably with not great nutrition, you could have gotten very sick very quickly had you not just rested a little bit.
Right. So I would order her lunch, and then while we're waiting for it to come, I would run down and get my meal at the cafeteria and then bring it back up. And they've only got so many nurses in that critical area. So one of them who I got to know really, really well, she came up to me and she goes, "Where's your support network?" She said she wanted to know what I was doing to take care of myself. And then on top of this, which I had to keep hidden from Ruth, is that my hips were failing me. So I'm hanging on that railing for dear life when I'm coming and going. But in a room, I couldn't do that. I had to grit my teeth and say, here we go. I got to be the best I can be for her.
Not let her see that you're suffering as well.
Correct.
So, Paul, she passes on January 14th,
Correct.
2019. And at this point, you were still working, right? She had been retired for about a year. And tell me how much longer you decided to stay at your job.
Well, after her first year, I said, she's 5 years older than I am. And I said, if you think I'm going to work till I'm 65 while you go and play for 5 years, I said, you're sadly mistaken. And so we had agreed that, and this was the summer before that in 2018, I said, I can do it on July 1st of 2019, which is when I turned 60. I can do it on the following end of school year, or I could do it the following July 1st. And so I reported directly to the president of the college. And so I sat down with Andy and I said, this is what we discussed. These are the 3 dates. Here's your heads up. My successor was already being trained by me. I'd already hired her. And so there was a succession plan in place, which from a HR perspective is critical.
And pretty darn amazing that that was already in place.
I was thinking ahead. So yeah, I hired it was for the 2 finalists. One of them said, well, I can't wait for you to mentor me. And I'm like, that's not the phrase I wanted. I want the phrase of, I can't wait to learn from you to be able to take over from you. And that's what the other one said. So that's why she got the job.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I had that discussion with Andy, and then after she passed, I guess I put in the book, I what happened in February. I was in my office in March, and one of the adjunct instructors came in and was complaining about a class setup or a parking spot or just some inane thing. It took all my self-control to not just blast her. And when she left, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. And so I went back to Andy and I said, I gave you those 3 dates. I said, when can I go? And he said, you can go July 1st. He goes, we'll just make it work. And I said, you can keep me on retainer. I'll charge an hourly rate for when I come in to consult, but I'll keep my company phone. And then I was also greatly involved in one last lawsuit that the college had. And I was the only person who knew everything. And so they had to keep me on board for really the next 7 months until we went to trial with that.
Wow. Paul, what I think is so interesting, you have the 7 stages of grief listed in your book. It's actually at the end, page 97.
Yes.
And the first stage is shock and denial. The second is pain and guilt. The third is anger and bargaining. The fourth is depression, reflection, loneliness. The fifth is the upward turn. The sixth is reconstruction and working through. And then the seventh is acceptance and hope. So when you talk about that one specific moment where that person came into your office and was like complaining about a parking pass, and frankly, that seems very menial when you think about the enormity of losing your wife unexpectedly.
Correct.
And that made me think of the third stage of grief, which is anger.
Yep.
And, I lost my mom 2 years ago, and I think that is the stage of grief that I really remember being in for a while. We all pass through these stages of grief differently at different times, at different rates.
Well, and yes, they're listed, but it's also not in order. And you can go, you can say, oh, I got past the anger stage, and then something else stupid happens in your life. And then you get mad all over again going, don't you get it? This is not important.
Yeah.
In the bigger scheme of things, take the parking place. I don't care. Cut in front of me in line. I don't care. But don't try to justify what's going on in your life and how it may be more important than what's going on in my life. We all have the burdens to carry. And so we have to decide, how are you going to manage through that? And so, especially with the anger, it's you're allowed to be angry. I think it's important to try and keep it in check, because you don't want to really push it out to people who may not deserve it.
Yeah, right.
So
The innocent bystander.
or, as I got scolded for more than once, I used to say, I don't like stupid people. And so when you're going the anger process and you run into a stupid person, that can be a trigger point
Yeah,
where you're going to snap or say something you probably shouldn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you had an interesting way to kind of navigate your post-retirement time now without your wife. You went on a cross the country trip.
Correct. So I reread the book Blue Highways, which talks about, I'm going to say a parallel story. He lost his wife because of divorce, lost his job. And the author of the book threw it in the back of a van and decided he was only going to follow the blue highways on the map. He wasn't going to follow the interstates. And so he stayed off the interstates and he went to all these different towns. And it's a fascinating book. William leased Heat Moon. He's a Native American, and most of where he visited was on the East Coast. But it's really interesting to read some of the history that's out there that you didn't know was there, that he ran into. So I wasn't trying to recreate the book, but that was my philosophy of, my mom and I always agreed when we took trips, we weren't going to eat at chain restaurants. And then the other one was to stay off the interstates if at all possible. And so I had to start on the interstate because I couldn't get from Denver to where I needed to go in Kansas without going on the interstate. But aside from that, I did a pretty good job. I'm a big Westerns fan, and I went to Dodge City, saw the Hokie Museum and the sculptures that they had, and just all Western history stuff that goes on there. And that was fun. And then I sort of went north from there up to the world's largest ball of twine, then came back down and went to the Eisenhower Museum, Presidential Library Museum. And so I did all those kinds of things to experience it for myself, but to continue to try and clear my head. And I talk a lot in the book about finding the new normal, because we were married for 30 years and you've got a balance in your life. And, it's no marriage is perfect. Ours certainly wasn't, but there's a balance. There's a yin and yang and a give and take, and you have discussions and you have a sounding board and you have somebody to listen and complain to in confidential situations. So it's a point where I had to go and figure out how am I going to get to that point again. When you don't have that confidant, I can only rely on my kids to a point, and I didn't want to burden them either. They're worried enough about me. So it's like, if I'm starting to go to them with problems, then I'm complicating their lives more than it needs to be. And it's not fair to them. And so I was really in tune to that as well. So,
It's interesting. So the last episode that I recorded was with one of my high school best friends, and she talks about solo travel, right? Like for fun.
true.
So here you're doing solo travel as part of your grief process, but it's so hard for us who've been with a partner to be alone, because you're almost, well, not that you're never alone, but you're like, okay, what are we having for dinner? Where are we going for Thanksgiving? What do the kids need? And really, I want to even come back to, you were married for 30 years, but Ruth was like your summer next door neighbor.
Correct.
So this woman was in your life for,
As long as I can remember.
let's talk about how it turned from a platonic girl next door to how you married her.
Well, when I was in college, and she's already out of college, her grandfather grew up in Marquette, and he had passed away. And they're trying to get the house ready for sale. And so there was a bunch of furniture in the house that she wanted. And so she called me. I was at Lakeland University at the time in Sheboygan. And she said, can I pick you up? And she said, then we'll go up and rent a U-Haul and then load up the truck and then drive it back down to, she lived outside Chicago at the time, Arlington Heights. I said, sure, I can do that over a weekend, no problem. And so that was sort of the first spark that we had.
You weren't romantically interconnected. You were just friends.
Correct.
You saw each other in the summer. Your parents or grandparents had cabins next to each other.
Correct.
In Autrain. So this was just like the girl next door. She was a few years older.
Yep.
So this is the first time where you look at each other differently.
Correct. Yeah. So it was funny because when she came to the college to pick me up, I could hear her heels walking down the hallway because it was linoleum. And so she came in the room and to the point where we didn't even hug each other. So, oh, you're here. Glad to see you. And she goes, yeah. She goes, I need a place to change. And so my best friend Seth was with me, and I introduced him. And so I showed her where the ladies' room was, and she was going on to change. Seth looked at me. He goes, don't let that one get away.
Wow.
So he saw something right away that I probably was oblivious to. It went from there. She ended, the bigger catalyst was she got out of a 10-year relationship at the same time that I was ending a 5-year relationship. And we'd corresponded, but again, it wasn't anything serious, not drawing hearts on the bottom of the page and, lovey-dovey stuff at all.
Just like a friendship from your childhood
Right.
and growing up.
Yeah. And so, she would talk to my mom because they were both into crocheting and cross stitch and needlepoint and all the craft stuff. And so they were very close to start with. So,
I bet your mom was so happy.
oh, she was. She was thrilled. She goes, thank God I don't have to get to know the in-laws and I like them already. So my mom and dad played cribbage with her parents every single night in the summertime.
Wow.
They would go next door and, one house to the other and play cribbage every night. So, and my dad and my father-in-law played at a 8:20 standing tea time. So every morning, Monday through Friday, they go and play golf together.
Oh my God.
And so, yeah, so it was a very, very tight group of friends that, lived a very full life together. And I'm very fortunate that I was in that situation.
That is like beyond Norman Rockwell. I mean, truly. Like, I'm sure both sets of those parents had thought that before. Do you think?
Yeah.
But nobody ever pushed you guys together.
No, not at all.
The day Ruth needed help with the furniture.
That's sort of what started the whole thing. And then we just stayed in touch from there. And it just sort of grew. And then when she moved out to Boston, she moved in with my friend Bill, and I had an apartment, and she moved in temporarily till I find a place of my own. And then, as Bill says, I came home and all the boxes were gone, and it was time for me to move. So,
She was there to stay.
yeah. So,
Well, I think I shared this with you. Not just your grief process, but the grief over this beautiful woman, like this love of your life. And tell us a little bit about Ruth. You actually have a scholarship in her honor. Let's talk a little bit about who Ruth was and like what she did as a career.
she did a number of jobs right out of college. She went to UW-Stevens Point and then finished at Madison. She got a degree in home ec. And when she graduated, she moved back to Beloit, her hometown, and opened up her own shop and made her own clothes
Oh my God.
and her own artwork and sold it. And so
Wow, how creative.
for 5 years, she was successful at that.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, anybody who can do that, in my mind, is really a step ahead.
Oh, so talented. And to take your creative project or product and create that into a successful business, that's quite the accomplishment.
Yeah. So, and then when that ran its course, she got a job with General Tire of all places. And so she was like the office manager for the corporate General Tire in Arlington Heights, and did that for 5 years. And then when she moved out with me in Boston, she got a job working for a headhunter and recruiting candidates. When we went back to Chicago, she got a job with a different headhunter. And then we had our first child. And so she took a tiny leave of absence, and then I got a new job. And so she was sort of looking for a job, but not really. And then I got transferred to Delaware, and we got to Delaware right after we had our second child.
Wow.
And so she was working for a competitor to ADP, payroll company, and she was an account manager for them. And for her to go into Philadelphia to commute, we ran the numbers on it, and with parking and gas and lunch before wardrobe, it would have cost her $15 a day every day she worked.
Wow.
So she became a stay-at-home mom because health or daycare for two just was,
Oh my gosh. Astronomical.
yeah, even at that time. So that's when she decided to be a stay-at-home mom and got back into her crafts. And so she did a lot of kids craft work. And so she did it in Delaware, and she had a partner there that she would work with, and they had a little play group, and they would get together once a week and, do their activities, whatever it was. And then from Delaware, I moved to Manistee for a year and worked for a bank there. And then I got my old boss rather, called and offered me a job in California. And so we ended up moving to California. And so she continued with the kids' activities and doing that, and being the stay-at-home mom.
What a gift to your family, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, truly, especially with moving so much. I mean, moving, they say is like the second most stressful event in someone's life, the death of a loved one being the first. And for you to have, like, to be moving for your job, like, what a gift that she was there to kind of like be stable for the kids and, be present. And
One of my good friends said, Ruth is an absolute saint. She puts up with you, and then she's able to deal with these moves every single time.
yeah,
So there were challenges, there were ups and downs, but it's like we got through it.
yeah.
When we got to Colorado, I took the job as a chief executive of HR out there. The vice president for the campus I was at, we had 3 campuses. Front Range Community College is the largest college in the state. We service 30,000 students on 3 different campuses plus satellites.
Wow.
And so I was on a different campus every day. Some days I was on 2 campuses, and one day, it was a real crappy day, I was on all 3. The vice president of the campus for my office got to know her, and she needed a manager of this one particular project. And so Ruth took that on a full-time basis, which was a foot in the door. And then the college applied for a $25 million grant to establish a machining program. We were one of an 8-college consortium, and Front Range was the lead college for it, to the point where the Secretary of Labor came out to present the grant to the
Oh
colleges.
my
I mean,
gosh.
this was a big, big deal.
Oh, yeah.
So we all wore ties that day.
For the big wigs coming.
For sure. So she applied and got that job to manage the grant as a head person, to the point where when she retired 5 years later, out of $25 million, we only returned $100 to the government.
Wow.
That's how closely she made sure
Managed.
Everest managed it. And I remember coming over to her desk at 5 o'clock when I said, well, let's go home. I said, I had a bad day. And she goes, nope, not yet. She goes, I'm missing 43 cents. And so I'd stay there half hour so she could find that 43 cents. I said, I'll give you the money. She goes, that's not it. No. So, but
She had so many gifts and talents,
absolutely.
right?
So the scholarship I established was in her honor, goes to women that go into the machining program. And so she believed that women were equal to men on all accounts, that they are leaders in their own right. They have every opportunity to do that, as they should. And she said, we've got to figure out how to recruit women into that. And that was on the side. I mean, that's not part of her job. But as she's talking with the people who are establishing the program, she goes, you got to make sure that this is balanced. And so she's pushing them to say, this has to be inclusive. You've got to figure out how to make sure that women feel absolutely accepted into the program. So that was my motivation to set that up. And I got to meet the first 2 recipients, and it's interesting to hear their story and their struggles and how much, it's $1,000 for a year. It's not a huge scholarship, but even that, especially at community college, these people are struggling, and
Yeah.
it makes a difference.
It
So,
absolutely makes a difference. And I'm going to plug your website here. So your book is called 19 Days, One Man's Journey Through Grief, but your website is called 20 Days and Beyond.
correct, which is the title of the first chapter. I went to get 19days.com, and at the time it was owned by a company in Canada that did basement renovations. And they would not return my calls on me buying the URL. So my niece is my editor on the book, and so I was brainstorming with her. I said, we got to have what else can we call this? And so it just came to me one night. I woke up and I wrote it down. I called her the next day and I said, what about this? And she goes, it works. Let's do it.
And it's brilliant because your book is really the process through grief, like your process of grieving. And one of my favorite quotes from the book, I'm going to share 2. My first favorite quote from the book is focus on being happy, even if it is just a vacuum. And I think this sort of goes to show that the enormity of grief is like in every moment, in every meal, in every drink, in every fabric of our beings and of our situations.
As I like to say, when you throw your arm over to the other side of the bed and it's empty, that's when it hits like, oh yeah, I'm by myself.
Hmm.
You forget sometimes.
Yeah. So you're just like, you know what? I'm going to get a new vacuum. And I thought that was so profound because I think what you're doing and you're encouraging men, especially, like you said, your counselor actually encouraged you to write this book.
Correct.
There are not a lot of men that are writing books about grief. A lot of women have,
Correct.
apparently.
So it's mostly women, and I won't say majority, but a large portion of them are also religious and faith based, and mine is not. I'm not a particularly religious person. And so I want to make it clear that, if you're looking for the word of the Lord, this is not the place to look. I came back from this trip and I was overwhelmed by all things Ruth in the house. And then my son and daughter in law were living in the basement and they had encroached on the main floor. So I felt like I really lost any personal space that I had. And so that's why I went to this counselor that my friend had recommended. I told her my story and she goes, "You're doing great." I said, "I don't feel like I'm doing great." She goes, "No." She goes, "You're doing great." She goes, "You should write a book." I said, "Oh, I'm flattered. Thank you." But I said, "That's not why I'm here." And I said, "I need help." And she goes, "No." She goes, "You're doing well." She goes, "I don't think you do." She goes, "I don't think you realize how well you're doing." And so I said, "Well, okay." So we went from there. I said, "I'll think about it." And I thought about it for a few weeks. And one afternoon, opened up the laptop and started to write. And I wrote 10 pages. And I'm not going to say it's the first 10 pages. I just wrote 10 pages. And my son came home and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, a counselor said I should write this book. There's no resources on grief out there." And he said, "She's right." He goes, "Keep writing. They're already written by men out there." And so there are a few, but they're far and few between. My goal when I first started to write, I said, is I want to help one person. My goal has been modified to I want to help one more person. And I'm reminded regularly that I'm still achieving my goal. And so, for example, I just established a scholarship at Lakeland University in my name
You did.
for a musician. But the person who I worked with to make the donation, she had gone through a loss. And so she got my book and read it and was complimenting me on the book. And I said, "I hope you gave it to somebody who needs it." And she goes, "I put it in the resource center for the counselors to have as a resource for students who are going through the process." So I'm like, okay, I'm reaching somebody else. I found this used book website and you get titles, brand titles for a discounted price, like half price.
Oh,
I put in 19 days. It was there.
wow. So someone had donated the book
Yeah.
to this website.
And I think people are looking at paying it forward,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not in this to make money. All the money that I make goes to the scholarship fund. So I don't make anything from it. So, with that being said, it's like I'm just really trying to get the resource out there because when I look at, when Kobe Bryant died, I was sitting there trying to figure out how can I get this book to Shaquille?
Hmm.
That's where my mind was like,
Wow.
he's going through the same grief process I'm going through.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he need this resource? I continue to look forward to say, what else can I do to help get the word out and help people understand that there are resources available for you?
So valuable. I have 3 people in my life who passed away in October from breast cancer. Age 38, age 52, age 65, all of them left a husband behind. And men need to hear this straight talk. One of my other favorite quotes is, "Don't let people tell you what to do." I think that you're giving men permission, you're giving humans permission to grieve in their own way.
Yes.
And that is so valuable and so beautiful. I do want to talk a little bit about, I mean, this is your legacy. This book is, I mean, it's going places as you see, it's on websites. I want to talk a little bit about what you did for the library and the people who
Can you tell us a little bit about that library store?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. So this spring I went in the library. Oh, I needed to use the fax machine. I'm using library as a fax machine, and there's no charge for it if you have a membership. So I had some documents I had to get over to my CPA. And so I had to scan it. You make a copy and then they scan that in and then it goes out. Well, I'm sitting there waiting for them to go through the process, and there's a coffee can, like an old Folgers can with the plastic lid on the top with a slit in it, and it says "Fund for Unpaid Fines."
Hmm.
I'm like, well, how many can that be? And so I asked, how many fines do you have for unpaid books? And she said, well, what's your student's name? I said, no, give me the total number. I said, how much is it? And she goes, $780. I went, okay. And I said, it seems like a lot. She goes, school's not out. She goes, school just got out. She goes, last day is tomorrow. And she said, as they clean out their lockers and stuff, a lot of them will drop the books off. If you ask again in 2 weeks, it'll be a much lower number. So I said, okay, so I can't look back in 2 weeks. And I said, what's the number now? And she's like, it was $500 and change. And I took out my checkbook and wrote a check. And she about fell on the floor because she goes, nobody's ever done this before.
I'm sure she did.
So
Because not only is it giving of your money for something but you're like paying someone else's debt, which is really profound to all those people, all those kids who maybe they didn't have $2.50.
right.
What a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So, I've got a number of charities that I give to monthly, NPR being one of them. There's a dog rescue place called Albert's Dog Lounge. It's down in Wisconsin, and they believe that senior dogs should die with dignity, all volunteer. And so I send them money every month, and they send me their newsletter. I haven't adopted a dog yet, but I have one. She ever passes away, then I'll consider it again. But I just like their philosophy and mission of what they're doing. My daughter's a vet tech. She's the one who recommended it to me. I give to a couple different food mates regularly. So, I've got my pet projects out there. One place I volunteer my time is with a group called Give a Mile. Give a Mile is an organization out of Canada. The founder started it because he lost his best friend at an early age. Family members couldn't get there to say goodbye because they couldn't afford the plane ticket.
Wow.
And he thought that was wrong.
Yeah.
So he did research and he found out that there's 100 million, billion, however many miles, frequent flyer miles that go unused and expire every year. So Give a Mile, you can send in your frequent flyer miles from American Airlines or United or Delta or wherever it is, or you can send money because they have to pay taxes on the ticket even though they're using miles for it. And so they connect and allow either family members to fly to somebody who's dying, or they can take the last trip with grandma back to, I was very involved in one where the niece took grandma back from Florida to Texas to see her brother and sister one last time before she died. And she had less than 3 months to live. And after she saw him, she passed away 6 weeks later. And so it was my Southwest Miles that paid for those tickets for them to be able to do that. And so it's a group that, continues to reach out. I went to the International Hospice Conference in Montreal, where they talk about all that has to do with hospice, all it's related. And so I sat at the vendor table with Give a Mile
Oh my gosh.
and told people about what we do and tried to get the word out. The more people that know it, the more people are going to donate and the more people are going to use it. And so I reached out to the hospice places here in Marquette and told them about it. They're thrilled with the information. I did the same thing at Houghton. And so, it's a point where you have to tell people, you have to educate them.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it. But what I really do for them is I manage their database. So every person that is in contact with them, they want to track the organization, the name, phone number, address, email, how they met them, what the follow-up is. So I've got a 25-column spreadsheet that I manage for them. Canada has their own tab, US has their own tab. And then when they need a report, then they send me a message and say, can you run a report on this in this order? But when I first started, it was funny because I said, well, how much time do you want me to give? And he'd go, well, if you can give an hour a week, we'd be thrilled. I said, well, I can do that. That's easy. So they sent me, they had 10 spreadsheets that were set up by 10 different people.
Hmm.
So the first thing I did is with I call her my boss. She's not my boss, but I said, let's talk about what those column headings are. So we did that and got that. And then I sat down and dissected every one of those spreadsheets and dumped them together. She called me after a couple of weeks. And she says, well, how you doing? I said, good. She says, well, where are you? I said, well, I threw 3 of them already. And she goes, how many hours a week are you putting in? I said, 10 to 12. And she goes, well, I don't understand. She goes, I didn't ask so much time. I said, it's basketball season. She goes, what? I said, I've been doing it for years. I said, this is simple work. I said, I can have a basketball game on and combine these spreadsheets at the same time. And she goes, great, and then she goes, how long does the season last? I said, till April 1st. She goes, what season's next? So I got that all done. So now it's a point of maintenance. So I probably get 10 to 15 contacts a week. I drop them in. I just did a report for them the other day. But that's just another way where, you can give money, but you can also give time as part of looking to pay it forward and what else can you do. So my cousin David lost his wife last year. His last name is Meese and his wife's name was Ruth. So I had to go to a second Ruth Meese funeral, which you'd never expect to do. I was talking with him. He was worse than I was. Totally lost. Doesn't cook. He goes, I couldn't tell you where the pots and pans are in the kitchen, let alone know how to use them. He goes, I found a grief group. And this was like 5-6 weeks after the funeral. I said, how many people in your group? And he said, 8. So I packaged up 8 books and I sent them to him. He gave them to the minister who was leading them. He texted me when he got the books. And then I called him a couple of days later because I knew he had a meeting in there. I said, how are the books received? He said, I gave them to the minister on Tuesday afternoon. He goes, our meeting was Wednesday night, and he was quoting from your book on Wednesday.
Wow.
He goes, so that's how much of a positive impact you had right away. What do you do to get the word out to be able to help people? This is a group in Ohio, so not anybody I know or see on a regular basis.
Well, that's what I'm hoping this podcast is going to do, right? Is to share your story, to share these resources. My producer will have all of these in the show notes. You are doing so much good through a tragedy, through what life handed you these lemons and you made lemonade.
You didn't mention my most quoted line out of the book.
Oh,
on,
that.
on the bottom of page 82.
We find it.
Time heals all wounds. Bullshit. My wound is still here. It hasn't gone anyplace.
Yeah.
And I don't live it every day like I did, obviously, in 2019, but it's still there. I'm doing some work at the house. I'm anxious about it, and Ruth's not there to help me. When I resided the house, I thought, okay, I'm picking out the vinyl and I got the roof, and he goes, well, what color shingles do you want? I'm like, color? I said, I don't do color. Ruth does color. I said, that's not my job.
Yeah.
It's those things where when you talk about that your relationship is a partnership, that's what you look at to say, well, how do I balance this? When I've got 100% of this, I've got to be grandpa and grandma. I've got to be mom and dad. So how do you make sure that you're doing the best you can? And it's not perfect. It never will be. But it's like you've got to be aware that you've got additional responsibilities of things you've got to step up and do.
So, Paul, in closing, what else do you want our listeners to know? We'll list all of these beautiful resources and websites in your book. Anything else?
No, like I said, I'll go back to the importance of having that power of attorney. And I said that to me is sort of the basis for you to be successful as you go through that. Because at least for me, I had peace of mind that I did everything I could. And I talk about the health professionals that I fired that were assigned to Ruth's case. A friend of mine in Houghton last year, her husband had passed away from cancer. It was a longer battle than Ruth's, obviously. She said, nobody told me I could fire the doctors. I really wish I had known that ahead of time.
Yeah.
I said, you have the right to do that.
Yeah.
I said, you're the advocate. So, but she wasn't aware. So, she read my book well after the fact that he passed away. And she goes, I really wish I had known this ahead of time. She goes, I will definitely be one that will be advocating for you and trying to pass the word on and get people to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are the best advocates for our loved ones, right? I mean, we know their wishes, we know what they would want, what they wouldn't have wanted, and we can take that information from a physician and then we get to make that decision if we have that power of attorney. So would you recommend that people go to an attorney, or is there something online that is legitimate? Or
There are sites out there that are legitimate, yes. And so it doesn't have to be a lot of money. You can do a simple will, you can do a simple power of attorney, just so you've got something there. Life gets easier once you have those things in place. If you don't have a will in place, then you're going to go to probate court. And that's a whole nother series of mess and painful activities you have to go through. Those are the two documents that I really encourage people to make sure they have in place, for as painful as it is. I've got a group of friends down in Wisconsin where I spend my winters, and I got on a soapbox once and I had too much to drink, and I was yelling at this woman because she said, I can't decide who to give the power to. And she goes, I don't know. And she goes, I'm not comfortable doing that. I said, give it to me. I said, it doesn't matter who you give it to, Joanne. I said, you've got to be able to have somebody there as your advocate who can say, this doctor doesn't make sense, or this process doesn't make sense, or these tests don't make sense. I said, you have to have somebody there to challenge that. I said, otherwise it's status quo. I said, and guess what status quo is for them? What's the easiest way to get from point A to point B?
yeah, absolutely.
I said, that's why I continue to talk about it and how important it is to have that in place.
That's wonderful. The book is 19 Days, One Man's Journey Through Grief by Paul M. Meese. Your website is 20 Days and Beyond. And one of the things I thought you were going to say, your most famous quote was, be kind. Because that's sort of your tagline, right?
Tagline, correct.
Like,
Please be kind. It's really not that hard.
yeah.
And so I put that oftentimes on Facebook, especially with the amount of negativity we see these days that's out there. And it's like, just take a breath. Please be kind. I see people on Facebook sometimes that'll post, well, if there's a guy behind you in line and he's only got 3 items, would you let him in front of you? Yes. Like, that to me is not a challenging question.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. And sometimes you're aware of what's going on, and we're
Right.
aware that this is a need that's out there, and it's a real need.
Yeah.
And so it's those types of things that give me hope. And I say, you can be kind, it doesn't take much.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to be kind to people.
Yeah. And I think what's really beautiful and cool, and I know you're not tooting your own horn, but this book is about grief. And I think what I see from this perspective is that you have chosen to use your time to do good and multiply good and multiply good, and be really leaving a legacy, not just for Ruth and her scholarship, your scholarship, and just all of the ways that you're helping people. So, I mean, you should feel proud, and I hope that what a magnificent legacy this is you're leaving. So
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. So it was nice. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a guest on this podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.